Always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world for
Is that going to be?
One of the great survivors of South African politics, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, is the only major party leader to have contested every election since apartheid gave way to democracy in 1994. Buthelezi is among the few remaining veterans of the struggle against white minority rule, his role, though, still debated. He formed the Inkatha Freedom Party in 1975, giving a voice to the Zulu nation, and Buthelezi became one of the very few black politicians engaged actively in apartheid-era politics. But in the townships there was sometimes violent hostility between the Zulus and supporters of the African National Congress. At South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearing on apartheid-era crimes, Buthelezi was accused of fomenting the violence, a charge he denies, while claiming the ANC betrayed him and its own ideals. He was a senior member of President Nelson Mandela's cabinet, serving as Home Affairs Minister until 2004. Elder statesman, esteemed Zulu leader, and prince in the royal house, Buthelezi remains a member of parliament where he's considered a voice of reason, with a dim view of South Africa's political future. Today, Talk to Al Jazeera meets Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi in the hills of KwaZulu-Natal. Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, thank you for speaking to us on Al Jazeera.
Thanks very much.
I want to start first of all with recent events. After President Jacob Zuma apologized to the South African nation, following that constitutional court ruling against him for using state public money to renovate his home here in Zululand, you made some comments about it that suggested you weren't entirely satisfied. What did you think of his apology?
Well, I felt it didn't go far enough, actually, looking at the fact that, there are many failures that took place as far as the whole issue of his residence in Nkandla and the extent to which the majority party was prepared to...
The ANC.
To sort of shield him, and they used their majority to do so. And I felt that, actually, it didn't go far enough, in fact, as far as that is concerned, because I felt that, the damage that it had done even to the country as a whole, the image of the country and the decorum of Parliament was such that I felt that he should have said much more than he did.
What would you have considered acceptable? Do you think that he should have resigned?
I would have been happy if he articulated the fact that he was in the wrong and that he realizes that, in fact, he let down the people of South Africa, and also the fact that he failed to uphold the Constitution when he's the custodian of it, more elaborately, not as short as it happened. I'm not personally against the idea of him apologizing, but I felt that it didn't go far enough,
Do you feel it would be appropriate under the circumstances?
I've just said it now, that if he articulated the fact of the wrong, the way the public protector was treated by his party, and also some of his utterances himself in Parliament, when this revelation came, through the Concord, then I felt that he should have been articulated more detailed, more penitent, with more penitence.
Do you think under the circumstances it would be appropriate for the president to resign?
Well, I think that is up to him. You see, I felt that it was for him to weigh the fact that this has caused so much damage to the country, and therefore it was up to him. And in fact, I blamed members of the ANC myself more than Mr. Zuma, because I think they misled him, including the reports that were actually put before us in Parliament by his ministers.
You've been, on a number of occasions, very critical of the government and of President Zuma. You are political rivals, of course, so that would be natural. I wonder, is your view of him in any way informed by the fact that he is a fellow Zulu, the first Zulu president of this country? Does that give you any insight into his character?
No, I think that there's nothing particular about us being both Zulus as such. I regard him and put him on the same pedestal on which I put Mr. Mandela and Mr. Mbeki, his predecessors. And in fact, I can, although we're both Zulus, I must say that I got on very well with both Mr. Mandela and also Mr. Mbeki, rather than with him. And I've complained in Parliament about the fact that even when I write him letters, not even an acknowledgement of receipt is short. He doesn't even acknowledge receipt of my letters. And I've given advice to him concerning the fact that 2 of the national commissioners were actually disgraced. And I said that insofar as they were selected among comrades and cadres of the party, it was high time that he appointed a trained policeman, and he ignored it, and he appointed the present commissioner, who is now in trouble again. He has never actually taken seriously any word of advice from me.
You mentioned Nelson Mandela, of course, a man that you've described as a close friend, albeit one with whom you shared rivalries over time. You served in his cabinet.
Yes.
And you were Home Affairs Minister from 1994 until 2004. I wonder,
correct.
Do you see differences in the styles of leadership, the integrity perhaps of leadership between President Mandela and the present day government under Jacob Zuma?
No, I see that because, in fact, Mr. Mandela, in connection with a man who was very petty, he actually was quite willing to go to court and so on. And I think that there's a very big difference in style, because I think that I would say the 2 previous presidents, and in particular Mr. Mandela, actually he listened. That's a big difference. I would point out that he was a more listening president than the present president.
Do you feel that the ANC, the governing party of today, has let this country down, has let down the vision of Nelson Mandela?
I think even the fact that some of them actually have come out up front saying so, I think this speaks volumes about that person, that even members, even some of the so-called icons of the party,
Ahmed Kathrada, people like that,
have actually come out, saying that there's something wrong.
Do you think it can be fixed? Do you think South Africa can be put back on the path that Nelson Mandela foresaw for this country?
I think, of course, that's a matter of political will. In that, as far as if there's political will, there's no reason why it cannot be fixed.
You've outlived, obviously, Nelson Mandela. You've also outlived many of the stalwarts of the struggle for freedom in this country and the transition to democracy. I wonder, as your political generation recedes, do you see South Africa receding or regressing from those heady, hopeful days of 1994 and the transition to democracy? Is there a regression happening now?
I think that's a fact. I mean, the whole issue that is facing the country, the crisis that is facing in the country, is actually very relevant, as far as that question is concerned, because, the actually the issue that faces South Africans at present, in fact, indicates the extent to which we have receded. We have taken steps backwards rather than steps forward.
Moving back now towards present.
And the case now of, some then of the 200 young men, there were some who were used by some people in the violence against the other side, against the ANC. And that is what they use as evidence that I was colluding and that this was a force which was set up for me by the government to fight the ANC, 200 young men, which is actually laughable. But a case in the High Court took place. The Minister of Defense, who had trained these people, Magnus Malan, and Zakele Kumalo, a member of my party, the administrative secretary of the party, was charged, and the case went on for 18 months, and they were acquitted.
You have expressed concern about, currently, the new atmosphere of divisiveness in the political discourse, the return of race to the political debate. A few months ago, Penny Sparrow, a white estate agent, wrote on Facebook that black beachgoers were monkeys. This created a massive controversy in the country. On the one hand, Jacob Zuma says race is overblown. On the other hand, you have a populist reactionary politician like Julius Malema, who openly says all white people are racists. You've expressed concern about this divisiveness in society now.
I'm very concerned, in fact, because it's not the tradition of the ANC to be racist, It isn't. And actually, I very much regret that, that this racism has now actually come up and that we're now struggling with racism because throughout the struggle for liberation, it was not just a black struggle of black against white. I mean, it was South Africans who accepted democracy and those who were oppressing us. But now, all of a sudden, it is so. And what is more, during 2010, during the World Soccer, the South African nation showed that we can really be one nation. And when people say that we're a rainbow nation, I say there's nothing like that because, in fact, I believe myself that we're like a bowl of salad where tomato is a tomato, where cabbage is a cabbage, because this is a multicultural country, and that's the reality. And you'll see that, in fact, the social cohesion hasn't taken place in this country because this month, for instance, the 27th of this month is Freedom Day. A function is organized by the state where all of us as South Africans should celebrate. You'll find hardly 100 whites attend, or Indians,
Well, we're
still a long way to go.
You've said yourself the Rainbow Nation was foisted on South Africa without healing the rifts, the hurt, the division between its people. We just papered over them.
Right.
So do you think that's going to come back and bite South Africans?
It is coming back to bite South Africans, and it's very tragic.
And yet you've also said this, South Africa still projects, however dimly, the internationally accepted idea of a miracle transition from racism and political oppression to democracy, equality and freedom. It still projects, however dimly. That suggests you're hopeful.
Yes, no, I haven't abandoned hope because I always say hope sustained us during the liberation struggle. During the darkest days of apartheid, we didn't abandon hope. And I always say that a friend of mine said, Lawrence van der Post, the famous writer, whenever we talked with him, he always quoted, Stevenson, that it is better to travel in hope than to arrive.
His political standing is much reduced, but here, in the hills of Zululand that he calls home, Mangosuthu Buthelezi is a much revered traditional leader. His praise name, Shenge. He's a prince in the royal house. Let's turn to a subject perhaps closest to your heart, the Zulu nation here in KwaZulu-Natal. One American researcher particularly infuriated you recently. He described the Zulu royal family as parasites.
As what?
Parasites. Because of the public money they allegedly lavish on themselves and the institution of royalty in Zulu culture. He said that it was moribund, decidedly medieval, and that it should be quietly put down. That made you angry, huh?
Well, when people, they're just swearing at us, you know. Now, if that gives them comfort to swear at us and call us all those names, well, good luck to them. But I just wonder whether it's not racist to say that our royal family is a parasite, whereas, in fact, there are countries, the mother of all parliaments actually is the British Parliament, and the head of state is not elected, the Queen is not elected, and there are many other countries in Europe, you know, Norway, Sweden, you know, and Holland, they have royal families. I don't know why in their case they're not parasites. They're not called parasites. You know, in Zulu tradition, the people always serve the king. The people looked after the king. It was the duty of the people to look after the king. Most of the arrangements which they criticize concerning our own king, King Goodwill Zwelithini, were actually done by myself during the time when I was chief minister of KwaZulu. Because after all, we don't need to be apologetic, because the Zulu people, until 1879, were a sovereign nation, you know, and actually I don't therefore buy all these expletives that are used now to throw at the Zulu kingdom. The reason you mentioned earlier that it is said that I boycotted the election, which is nonsense. I said that we would not
threatened to boycott.
I said we would not participate unless we hear what is going to be the place of the institution of the monarchy within a democratic South Africa. That's all. And then on the 19th of April, when the election was on 27th, Mr. Mandela, Mr. de Klerk and myself came to the conclusion that we should address that after the election. But it was never honored. Up to now, that was never honored. But this is exactly why I wanted that sorted out at that time before, because the Constitution recognizes traditional leadership. But of course, it's a big fallacy that, you know, that means anything at all, because no one has unpacked what that recognition means, because the government, I mean the state, has passed legislation which makes land, all the land under municipality, wall to wall. And now we've struggled, even under Mr. Mandela, under Mr. Mpegi, as traditional leaders, about the role, powers and functions of traditional leaders. Mr. Mpegi said that if the Municipal Structures Act did that, he would amend the Constitution. So on the 30th of November 2000, an agreement was made, a committee was set up by Mr. Mpegi. The chairperson of it was the same Mr. Zuma. He was then the deputy president. In this committee, there were ministers, there were also senior lawyers, and they came to the conclusion that we needed to amend Chapter 7 and 12, in fact, in order that the role, powers, and functions of traditionalists are not obliterated. You see, it really hurts us as Zulu people now and then when we see in the papers every time about our king is spending a lot of money and so on, etc., because it's exactly what I wanted sorted out myself before.
Well, let me ask you about
former state was set up.
Let me ask you about something else for which the King, Goodwill Zwelithini, has been in the papers recently. He's been reported to have made comments praising the apartheid government, saying that they built a strong economy which the black people of today are burning down in what he described as a so-called democracy. These are pretty incendiary comments.
No, I think it was just misunderstood. Because he was saying that even an oppressive government like that one ran the country better. It's just a way in which he put it, and the way in which journalists generally now in South Africa, they are always waiting for something from his mouth, you know, to twist and to slam him about it. Because what he meant was that how is it that now when we have a democratic government, that even the apartheid government could run the country better? That's just the point he was trying to make. That's all.
I understand.
But not that they're you know, oppressing us and what they did to us was okay. He didn't mean that.
You've been married for almost 65 years now to Irene, Princess Irene, a woman you've described as the love of your life.
Yeah.
Despite being born into a culture, into a position in which it would have been considered by many normal to take more than one wife, you decided to take only one, and you were pressured to take more than one. Why did you decide only to take one wife and spend your life with Irene?
No, because I'm a Christian, and actually that's how, if one is a Christian, that's how one, you know, gets married to one wife. You know, my father was married to 20. In fact, my mother was the 10th of the first 10. But actually, I decided, because an uncle of mine, Prince Mshieni, a brother to the king's grandfather, King Solomon, both brothers of my mother, was actually a Christian, and he married one wife. And King Solomon died when we were very young in the palace, and Prince Mshieni looked after us. And I actually admired the fact that he had only one wife, and I have no regrets about that. I know that I've suffered a lot of criticism, of course, from the people, because the polygamy of the Zulu people was actually tied up to the economic system, because in each one of the homesteads, you had cattle, goats, and sheep, and then you had wives there who saw to it that no one stole them and so on. So therefore, they said that I've destroyed, you know, the what do you call, the structure of our people, because I still have homesteads even now, but I don't have wives in them, which I should have done so.
You're still active in politics, you still attend Parliament regularly, you're clearly still committed to the Zulu nation, you are its traditional Prime Minister. I wonder, do you think you will lead your party into the next general election in 2019 to try and win governance of KwaZulu-Natal back from the ANC?
Actually, I don't know, because every day in 2012, my party had a general conference where they amended our constitution of the party to have a position of a deputy president. And the deputy president was actually appointed with intention, because they did that because I was myself saying that I definitely wish to retire, and I've been saying so for many, many years. But in 2011, of course, the chairman of our party was bribed by the ANC, and he split the party. And the big question that the people were saying that, well, using an analogy, that the party was a house which I had built, and it was now burning down, and that like a coward, I cannot, like a coward, run away. It's actually, I could retire even tomorrow, even next week, anytime. I definitely don't, I cannot say that I'll lead the election at that time, you know, definitely not.
So do you look forward now to a time when you will head off to your homestead in Ulundi and settle down with Irene and not have to go to work every day?
I do, actually. I do, because I think that God has been good to me, because I'm an octogenarian. And of course, the years that I'm living now, I always say they're just bonanza years, because the Bible says that a human being will only live for 70 years. So all these years I have up to my age are just a bonanza from God.
Well, you've beaten those odds by a long shot.
Thank you.
Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, thank you so much for speaking to Al Jazeera. A great honour. Thank you.
Thank you.